My name is Claire, and I never thought my world could flip upside down in just 10 seconds. It happened at 7:00 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, 30 minutes before my alarm was supposed to go off. I woke up to a pounding on my apartment door, the kind of pounding that makes your stomach drop before your brain even catches up. Still groggy hair sticking out in every direction, I stumbled across the living room expecting maybe a package delivery or maintenance emergency. But when I swung open the door there, she was my younger sister Natalie, with two oversized suitcases, a duffel bag, and her designer purse dangling from her arm. "Surprise," she chirped, though her eyes were swollen from crying. "I'll be living here for a while." She didn't wait for an invitation. She pushed past me, dragging her luggage across the hardwood floor, and collapsed onto my couch like it already belonged to her. I stood frozen, heart racing, trying to process what had just happened. And then, as if the situation wasn't shocking enough, my phone lit up with an incoming call. Mom. I pressed answer, still staring at my sister sprawled out in the middle of my sanctuary. "Claire, your sister is there, right?" Mom's voice was brisk, like she'd been planning this for days. "Good. Natalie is going through a rough time and she'll be staying with you. Oh, and one more thing, your rent is going to double starting next month." It felt like someone had reached into my chest and yanked out the air. Double rent. My rent was already carefully budgeted against my salary. I had been saving every spare dollar for a down payment on a house, slowly, patiently building a future brick by brick. And now, with one phone call and two suitcases, that future was slipping through my fingers. I wanted to scream to tell Mom this wasn't fair, to shove Natalie right back out the door. But instead, I swallowed my words because I knew the script. I had played this role my whole life. Natalie was always the one in crisis, the one who needed to be rescued, and I was always the one expected to sacrifice. As my sister began unpacking her toiletries on my coffee table like this was some kind of extended vacation, I felt something inside me crack. This was my home, my one safe space in a family that had never truly made room for me. And now even here I wasn't safe. But let me pause for a second. If you're watching this right now, ask yourself, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you have let her stay? Or would you have stood your ground right there at the doorway? Drop a comment below because I want to hear your stories. And if you've ever had family cross a line like this, make sure you hit subscribe because what happened next will make you question just how far family loyalty should really go. I didn't know it yet, but that morning wasn't just about losing my peace or my budget. It was the beginning of a battle for control of my apartment, my future, and my own sense of worth. And trust me, things were about to get a lot worse before they got better. The moment Natalie dropped her suitcases in my living room, I felt my carefully balanced world start to wobble. But before I explain what happened next, let me take you inside the life I had been building, a life that until that morning I thought was solid, steady, and mine. I had been working as a digital marketing strategist at a mid-sized agency downtown. Our office sat in one of those sleek glass towers with floor-to-ceiling windows, open concept workstations, and a break room that felt more like a trendy cafe. On good days, I'd sip cold brew while sketching campaign strategies on the giant whiteboards, watching the city stretch endlessly beneath me. It wasn't glamorous in the way people picture digital marketing, but it was mine. I'd climbed every rung myself, 4 years of grinding, landing bigger clients, and just recently being entrusted with our most important account, a national fitness brand about to overhaul its entire online identity. The whispers in the hallway suggested that if the campaign succeeded, I'd finally get the promotion I'd been chasing. That meant more money, more stability, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to accelerate my timeline toward home ownership. I wasn't just working a job, I was building a future. That's why my apartment mattered so much. When my parents first bought the small complex 5 years ago, they'd offered me one of the units at below market rent. At the time, I thought it was a blessing. I poured my heart into making it mine. The sectional couch took 6 months of careful budgeting to pay off. The espresso machine was my birthday splurge after a particularly grueling quarter. Even the bookshelves lined with psychology and marketing texts next to my vinyl record collection told the story of a woman curating her space piece by piece. On rainy Sundays, I'd curl up in my reading nook with a steaming mug of coffee, listening to the soft patter on the window, feeling, if only for a few hours, that I was exactly where I belonged. That apartment wasn't just 4 walls. It was proof that I could take control of my life even when everything else in my family felt out of my control. And I had plans. Clear, tangible plans. With my savings rate 20% tucked away each month and the potential promotion on the horizon, I estimated I'd have a down payment for a modest home within 3 years. I'd already started browsing real estate listings, learning neighborhoods, and imagining a front porch where I could finally plant the herbs I kept crammed into windowsill pots. That was my sanctuary. That was the dream I was holding on to. Which is why the knock at my door at 7:00 a.m. felt less like a sister showing up in need, and more like an earthquake cracking through the foundation of everything I had built. It wasn't just about space. It wasn't just about money. It was about the principle, the one thing I had fought tooth and nail for: independence. And now in one morning, that independence was under siege. Sometimes people assume independence is just about paying your bills, but it's so much more. It's about walking into your space and knowing every decision in it. Every lamp, every blanket, every framed picture was chosen by you. It's about not owing anyone an explanation. It's about knowing your peace is yours to protect. And that's why I need to pause right here and speak directly to you. If you've ever worked so hard to carve out a corner of the world for yourself, only to have someone barge in and claim it like it's theirs, tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from? Have you ever had family cross a line you couldn't ignore? Your stories matter here. They help all of us feel a little less alone in these battles. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button, because trust me, this story is just getting started and you won't want to miss the twists ahead. Looking back now, I realize that morning wasn't the beginning of Natalie needing help. It was the beginning of me being tested on whether I would finally choose myself or whether I'd fall back into the role I'd played my whole life, the responsible one, the fixer, the sister who sacrificed. What I didn't know was that my family had already written a script for me and they expected me to follow it. But this time, I was about to change the ending. Growing up in my family was like living in a house with two sets of rules, one for me and one for my younger sister, Natalie. If you've ever been the responsible one, the one expected to sacrifice, while another child was handed the world on a silver platter, then you already know the story I'm about to tell. From the outside, we looked like a perfectly average middle-class family. We lived in a comfortable home in the suburbs. Dad worked long hours in finance, Mom volunteered at the community center, and the two of us girls were supposed to be raised with the same values. But it didn't take me long to realize that Natalie and I weren't playing on equal ground. Take college, for example. I worked part-time jobs all through my undergrad years, everything from bussing tables at a diner to tutoring high school kids in math, just to keep my debt manageable. I graduated with a little bit of student loan baggage, but nothing I couldn't handle. Natalie, she bounced from one major to another at a pricey private university, switching directions 3 times before finally earning her degree. My parents covered every cent, not only tuition, but rent, food, even a shiny new car to make her commute easier. When I needed a car, I went to the bank. I signed my name on a loan agreement and spent 5 years making monthly payments until the day I proudly held the title in my hand. When Natalie needed a car, Mom and Dad took her to the dealership and signed the papers for her. No lecture, no repayment plan. Just, here you go, sweetie. It didn't stop in adulthood. When I lost my first job after a company-wide layoff, I asked my parents if they could help me out temporarily. They agreed at 7% interest due monthly. When Natalie quit her job because she didn't like the vibe, she moved right back into their house, rent-free, with her laundry washed and meals waiting for her. Now, don't get me wrong, I loved my family. I wasn't sitting around with a checklist of every unfair moment. But after years of playing second fiddle, I learned not to expect the same safety net Natalie enjoyed. Instead, I poured my energy into building my own life. I made peace with the imbalance by telling myself that independence was better than favoritism. If Natalie needed to be coddled, fine. I'd be the one who stood on her own 2 feet. That's why the apartment mattered so much. It wasn't just a cheap rental. It was my tiny victory proof that maybe my parents could acknowledge my effort. They bought the building as an investment, and when they offered me a unit at below market rate, I grabbed the chance. Finally, I thought something that worked in my favor. Finally, a win that didn't come with strings attached. Or so I believed. But favoritism is a sneaky poison. It seeps into everything. Conversations, decisions, even expectations you didn't know were being placed on you. When Mom called that morning and told me Natalie would be staying with me, it wasn't really a request. It was the same pattern, just in a new costume. Natalie needed saving. I was the one expected to sacrifice. And here's the hard truth: I had seen it coming. 2 weeks earlier, Natalie had texted me out of the blue. Just a simple, "Hey, how are you doing?" But we never texted, not unless there was a family gathering coming up. I remember feeling that odd twinge of suspicion. Then Mom followed up with a call. Natalie had broken up with her boyfriend, quit her job, and was going through such a difficult time. Mom's words, "family needs to stick together," should have set off sirens in my head. At the time, I just nodded and murmured sympathy. I didn't know those words were foreshadowing a storm. Looking back, I realized this wasn't just about Natalie moving in. It was about decades of patterns catching up with me. Every favor I didn't get, every second chance Natalie did, every time I was told to be grateful while she was praised for simply existing, it all led to that moment in my apartment. That's what favoritism does. It erodes boundaries until you stop recognizing when someone is crossing them. It trains you to accept less, to swallow resentment, to tell yourself this is just how family works. But the truth, family should never mean one person is constantly emptied so another can be endlessly filled. At that point, though, I hadn't connected the dots. I thought I was just dealing with an inconvenient house guest. I didn't yet understand I was about to confront the same broken dynamic that had shadowed me my whole life, only this time I wasn't a kid anymore. And this time I had something worth fighting for: my independence. If I'm honest, the storm didn't come without warning. The truth is, there were signs, subtle little cracks in the foundation, that should have told me Natalie's arrival was inevitable. But when you grow up in a family dynamic like mine, you learn to ignore those cracks, to smooth them over with excuses, because admitting what they mean is too painful. It started 2 weeks before that fateful morning. Out of nowhere, Natalie texted me, "Hey, how are you?" I remember staring at the screen, blinking. We weren't the kind of sisters who texted without reason. Our relationship was cordial at best. Holidays, birthdays, the occasional family dinner, that was the rhythm. So that tiny 3-word message should have been a red flag. Instead, I told myself not to overthink it. I typed back a simple, "Good, busy with work." "You," she replied with a vague, "Been better. Let's talk soon." Then came the call from Mom. I was half listening while chopping vegetables for dinner. When she launched into it, Natalie had broken up with her boyfriend. Apparently, he'd cheated, at least according to Natalie's version of events. She'd also quit her job at the boutique, saying her boss was toxic and she needed to take time to heal. "She's going through such a difficult time," Mom said, her voice heavy with concern. "Family needs to stick together during hardships." I remember freezing, knife suspended midair as that sentence landed. Family needs to stick together. With my family, those words weren't about unity. They were code. They meant you're about to be volunteered as tribute. But instead of questioning it, I swallowed down the unease and said the only thing I thought was safe. "That's tough, Mom. I hope she finds her footing." I didn't ask what role I was expected to play. I didn't push back, because pushing back never ended well. Looking back, I wish I had. The night before Natalie showed up, I was curled in my reading nook, scrolling Pinterest for ideas for a kitchen backsplash project I'd been planning. My budget was tight, but I had carved out just enough to make small upgrades, little touches that made the apartment feel more and more like home. I saved pictures of subway tiles and sleek lighting fixtures, thinking about how much personality it would add to my little kitchen. It's strange to think about now how calm I was, how secure. Because in less than 12 hours, that sense of control would be shattered by a knock at the door. But hindsight is cruel like that, isn't it? The clues are always so obvious once the disaster has already hit. I replay those days in my mind, sometimes wondering if there was anything I could have done differently. If I had pressed Mom when she said family sticks together, would she have admitted they were planning to send Natalie to me? If I had told Natalie no the moment she started texting me out of the blue, would she have dared to show up uninvited? The truth is, I don't think it would have mattered. In families where favoritism rules, the script is already written. Natalie's role was to be rescued. My role was to sacrifice. And whether I wanted to or not, they were determined to cast me in that part again. What I didn't realize at the time was that this wasn't just about Natalie's heartbreak or her lost job. It was about the way my parents saw me, not as an adult with boundaries, but as a resource, someone to lean on when their favorite child needed comfort. And that's why those subtle signs mattered so much. They were the foreshadowing of a much larger battle I didn't even know I was about to fight. A battle not just for my apartment, but for my autonomy, Because here's the thing about ignoring warning signs, eventually you run out of room to look the other way. The cracks widen, the pressure builds, and sooner or later everything collapses. And for me, that collapse came at 7:00 a.m., with a pounding on my door, and my sister dragging her life into mine. I should have seen it coming. But I didn't. And by the time I did, it was already too late. When I opened the door that Tuesday morning and saw Natalie with her suitcases, I thought maybe she was just stopping by on her way to Mom and Dad's. Maybe she needed a place to store her bags for a day or wanted a shoulder to cry on. That illusion shattered within seconds. "Hey, sis," she said with a forced smile, like this was some kind of fun surprise. Before I could even form words, she pushed past me into the apartment, rolling her luggage across the hardwood floor as if she already lived there. She tossed her purse onto my sofa, let out a dramatic sigh, and said, "Mark cheated on me, and my boss wouldn't give me time off to deal with it, so I quit. Everything fell apart. I'll be staying here until I figure things out." Her tone wasn't tentative. It wasn't a request. It was a declaration. I stood there barefoot still in my pajamas, hair sticking out, completely disoriented. "Natalie, what are you talking about? This is a one-bedroom apartment. There's no space for you here." She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, please." The couch pulls out into a bed. It's perfect. She plopped down on the cushions and looked around like she was touring a rental listing. "You've always had great taste, Claire. This place is adorable." My chest tightened. She was talking about my sanctuary, the space I had built piece by piece, the one place where I finally felt in control, and she was treating it like her personal crash pad. "Why didn't you just go to Mom and Dad's?" I asked, grasping for logic. "They're renovating the guest room," she said, rolling her eyes. "Besides, Dad snores like a freight train, and Mom's on some weird health kick where she only buys kale and quinoa. I'd go insane living there." It was surreal listening to her justify why my space was apparently more suitable for her needs than her own parents' house. And then the phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Mom. My stomach sank. I knew exactly what this was. "Claire, your sister is there, right?" Mom's voice was sharp, like she was already scolding me. "Good. She needs family right now. Make her feel welcome." "Mom, this is a one-bedroom apartment." I tried. "There's no space for her. She could stay with Jessica, her friend." "Jessica is not family," Mom snapped. "Family takes care of each other. Don't be selfish. This is temporary." Temporary. That word rang hollow. I'd heard it too many times before. Temporary meant until we decide otherwise. I looked over at Natalie, who was already unpacking her toiletries onto my coffee table, humming like she owned the place. My jaw clenched. I wanted to scream, "This is my home. You don't get to just move in." But instead I bit my tongue, because that's what I'd been trained to do: make room, step aside, accommodate. By the time I hung up the phone, it was clear Natalie wasn't asking. Mom and Dad had already decided, and once again my boundaries didn't matter. That night, as Natalie sprawled across the couch watching reality TV at full volume, I retreated to my bedroom, closed the door, and texted my best friend SOS. My sister just moved in. No warning, no choice. She replied instantly, "Oh no, flashbacks to college roommate days, want me to come over with wine." I stared at the screen, a lump in my throat. Because this wasn't a bad roommate. This was worse. This was my family crossing the line so blatantly it felt like I had no say in my own life. And that's when the first spark of anger ignited inside me. Not the kind of anger that explodes right away, but the kind that smolders quietly, gathering heat. I didn't know it yet, but that ember would eventually burn down the script my family had been handing me my whole life. But for now, I just sat in my room listening to my sister laugh at the TV, my sanctuary already slipping away. Tell me, what would you have done if your sibling barged into your home uninvited with your parents backing them up? Would you have let them stay, or would you have stood your ground right there? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I really want to hear how you'd handle it. Because I stayed quiet. And that silence cost me more than I could have imagined. The next morning I woke up to the sound of clattering dishes. For a split second I thought maybe I had dreamed the whole thing, that Natalie hadn't actually moved in, that my apartment was still my own. But when I stepped out of my bedroom there, she was standing in the kitchen wearing one of my t-shirts, pouring herself coffee from my mug. "Morning," she said breezily, as if we were college roommates instead of two adults who hadn't shared a space since childhood. Something inside me bristled. This wasn't a visit. This was occupation. By the time I got to work, my phone was buzzing with a text from Mom. "Remember, Claire, your sister is fragile right now. Don't make her feel like a burden. She needs stability. Stability. The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. I was the one who had worked 2 jobs for years to finally afford stability to rent this little one-bedroom that had become my haven. But once again, Mom had flipped the script. Natalie's needs were urgent, mine were optional. It was déjà vu, and I hated how familiar it felt. Growing up, anytime Natalie stumbled, Mom would swoop in arms wide, declaring that family comes first. Except family always meant me sacrificing while Natalie coasted. I remembered being 17, saving money to buy my first car. I had a jar full of 20s and 5s from babysitting jobs. One day it disappeared. Later I learned Natalie had used it to buy a prom dress. When I confronted Mom, she said, "Your sister needed it more. You'll have plenty of time to earn money for a car." That script, Natalie as the delicate one, me as the strong one, had been rehearsed so many times it became muscle memory. And now in my 30s, Mom was still directing the same tired play. That night, as I walked into my apartment, Natalie didn't even look up from the couch. "Oh, by the way, I used your Netflix account. Hope you don't mind." I couldn't remember the password, so I reset it. New ones on a sticky note on the fridge. I stood there frozen. She wasn't just borrowing my space, she was rewriting the rules inside it. I went into my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed, fists clenched. That ember of anger from the night before sparked hotter, but then another text buzzed from Mom. "Remember Claire. This is temporary. She just needs a little time. Be kind. Be kind." For years I had believed kindness meant silence. It meant swallowing my frustration, shelving my boundaries, playing the part they wrote for me. But that night, something cracked. For the first time, I let myself admit it. This wasn't kindness. This was control dressed up as virtue. Lying there in the dark, I whispered to myself, "Whose life is this really, mine or theirs?" That question echoed in my head until I finally fell asleep. And in the morning, I realized I wasn't just wrestling with an unwanted roommate. I was staring down decades of conditioning. It was no longer about Natalie's heartbreak or Mom's guilt trips. It was about me deciding whether I would keep living under their script or finally start writing my own. And that realization scared me more than anything else. Because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. So I ask you, if you had spent your entire life being told that family first meant you last, would you keep playing the role or would you finally walk off the stage? Let me know what you think, because maybe your perspective will give me the courage I needed back then. What I can tell you is this: by the time the weekend rolled around, the ember inside me wasn't just smoldering anymore. It was fire. And sooner or later, fire changes everything it touches. By Friday night, the cracks were no longer subtle. They were wide, jagged lines running straight through what used to be my peaceful little sanctuary. I walked into the apartment exhausted from a long week, craving nothing more than silence and maybe a glass of wine. Instead, I was greeted by the thump of bass shaking the walls. Natalie had turned the living room into her personal dance floor music, blasting from my Bluetooth speaker. Clothes were strewn across the couch, takeout containers littered the coffee table, and my favorite throw blanket was crumpled on the floor, stained with soy sauce. "Hey, sis!" she shouted over the music, waving a chopstick like a drumstick. "You don't mind if I borrowed your speakers, right? Oh, and I invited a couple friends over tomorrow. Hope that's cool." I froze in the doorway. This wasn't just clutter. This was invasion. "Natalie, this is my home. You can't just..." She cut me off with a laugh. "Relax, Claire. You're always so uptight. Live a little. It's just a couple friends. We'll keep it down." But I knew that keep it down in Natalie's language meant chaos until 2 a.m. I slipped into my bedroom, shut the door, and leaned against it, heart pounding. This wasn't what I had worked for. I'd spent years clawing my way toward independence, working double shifts, skipping vacations, budgeting every penny so I could finally have a space that was mine. And in less than a week, Natalie had turned it into a dorm room circus. I texted Mom hoping she'd finally understand. "This isn't working. Natalie's loud, messy, and bringing people over. I can't live like this." Her reply came within seconds. "She's hurting, Claire. You need to be patient. Family is about compromise." Compromise. Another word that meant Claire gives up what she wants, so Natalie can have what she wants. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, trying to breathe through the noise spilling in from the living room. Natalie's laughter cut through the walls sharp as glass. I clutched my pillow, wishing for silence, for respect for something that felt like home. And then it hit me, this wasn't just about dirty dishes or loud music. This was about power. Natalie wasn't just staying here. She was testing how far she could push, how much of my life she could absorb, until there was nothing left that was mine. The next morning, I found her in the kitchen making pancakes with my last eggs. Flour dusted the counters, syrup dripped onto the floor. She was humming, cheerful, oblivious. Want some? She asked, holding up a spatula. I looked at the chaos around me and felt something tighten in my chest. No, Natalie. What I want is my apartment back. She blinked as if I'd spoken a foreign language, then she smirked. Wow, dramatic much you've got to learn to share, Claire. Share, another word that meant surrender. I didn't respond. I just grabbed my bag, walked out the door, and wandered aimlessly through the city. I ended up in a park, sitting on a bench, watching kids chase each other across the grass. And for the first time, I let myself admit out loud, I'm losing myself in my own home. That sentence landed heavy like a stone in my stomach. I thought about calling a friend, maybe crashing on their couch for the weekend. But then what? This was my apartment. Why should I be the one exiled? The anger that had been smoldering inside me now burned hotter, brighter. And as I sat there staring at the skyline, I whispered to myself, this can't go on. Something has to change. Because I realized the truth, if I didn't take back control now, Natalie wouldn't just be crashing for a while. She'd consume my space, my peace, maybe even my sense of self. And that was the moment I knew the battle for my boundaries had officially begun. Saturday evening arrived, and with it came the storm I had been dreading. Natalie's couple of friends turned out to be 6 people, loud, boisterous, and carrying bags of cheap liquor. They filed into my apartment like they owned the place, dropping coats on my chairs, opening my fridge without asking, and laughing at a volume that made the windows rattle. I stood frozen by the doorway, clutching my keys so tightly they pressed into my palm. My sanctuary had officially been hijacked. Natalie spotted me and waved. Claire, you made it home just in time. We're having a little get-together. Loosen up, grab a drink. Her friends cheered, raising their plastic cups as if I were the guest in their home. That was it, the final straw. I marched into the living room, voice trembling but louder than I expected. No, this isn't a get-together. This is my apartment and none of you were invited. The room went silent for half a beat, the kind of silence that makes your heartbeat sound like a drum. Then one of Natalie's friends snickered. She's kind of uptight, huh? Natalie smirked, brushing me off like I was a fly. Don't mind her, she's always been dramatic. Something inside me snapped. Enough, my voice cracked like thunder. This is my home, Natalie. My lease, my bills, my rules. And you've turned it into a circus. You don't get to decide who comes here, what happens here, or how I live. That ends now. The shock on her face was almost satisfying. For the first time, she looked small-cornered. One of her friends muttered, maybe we should go. And slowly, awkwardly, they began gathering their coats, shuffling toward the door. Natalie's cheeks flushed red, her eyes narrowing at me like daggers. You just embarrassed me in front of my friends. Do you have any idea how cruel you sound? Cruel. That word twisted in my gut. For years, Mom had trained me to believe that standing up for myself was cruelty. But in that moment, I realized the truth. It wasn't cruelty, it was survival. I drew in a shaky breath. You can spin it however you want, Natalie, but I won't apologize for protecting my space. She stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door so hard a picture frame rattled on the wall. I sank into a chair, my body shaking with adrenaline. My heart pounded, but beneath the fear was something else, relief. For the first time in years, I had drawn a line, and I hadn't backed down. Later that night, as I sat in the quiet aftermath, I replayed the confrontation in my mind. My voice firm, her shock, the way her friends had looked at me not with pity, but with respect. And I thought, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can finally stop being the background character in my own life. Still, I knew this wasn't over. Natalie wouldn't leave quietly. And Mom would make sure I felt guilty for every word I had said. But there was no turning back. A door had opened inside me, and once you taste the air of your own freedom, you can't go back to suffocating. That night, I lay in bed whispering to myself, I am not cruel. I am not selfish. I am not wrong for wanting peace. The words felt foreign on my tongue, but each repetition made them stronger, heavier, real. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The real war for my boundaries had just begun. The morning after the showdown with Natalie, I woke up to the sharp vibration of my phone on the nightstand. Groggy, I reached over only to see the name on the screen. Mom. My stomach dropped. I already knew what was coming. Natalie must have called her the second the bedroom door slammed last night. I swiped to answer, bracing myself. Hello. Her voice came through tight-clipped like she'd been rehearsing every word. Claire, what did you do to your sister? The accusation in her tone hit me harder than any question. Not, how are you? Not what happened. Straight to blame. I sat up in bed, clutching the blanket. Mom, she invited a whole group of people into my apartment without asking. They trashed the place. I couldn't. You couldn't what? Show compassion. She's hurting Claire. She just lost her job. Her boyfriend walked out and you decide now is the time to humiliate her, in front of her friends. I bit down on my lip, heat rising in my chest. It's not compassion to let someone walk all over me. This is my home. She doesn't get to. Mom's sigh cut me off heavy and dripping with disappointment. Do you hear yourself? Always about you. You've been selfish since you were a child. Natalie needs support, and instead of being a good sister, you attack her. That word again. Selfish. The family brand they had burned into me. I tried to steady my voice. Mom, I've supported her my whole life. I've given up weekends, money, sleep, everything just to pick up the pieces she leaves behind. And now she's destroying the one thing I built for myself. Silence. For a second I thought maybe, just maybe, she understood. But then she whispered icy and sharp, "If your father were alive, he'd be ashamed of you." The words cut through me like glass. My throat closed, my eyes stung. She knew exactly where to strike. I hung up before I could hear more. My hands were shaking as I set the phone down. It was like I could still feel her voice crawling under my skin, planting those old seeds of guilt. I walked into the living room, staring at the mess left behind from last night: crumbs on the couch, sticky stains on the counter. Natalie's door was closed, the muffled sound of music seeping through. She was unbothered. I was the one carrying the weight. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just Natalie's chaos. This was the family cycle repeating itself, me, always the responsible one, always the caretaker, always the villain when I finally said no. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the table, letting the silence wrap around me. For the first time in years, I wondered, what if Mom was wrong? What if I wasn't selfish for wanting boundaries? What if the real selfishness was expecting me to sacrifice endlessly without ever being allowed to say enough? The thought scared me, but it also freed me. I picked up my phone, tempted to text Mom back to defend myself again. But I stopped. Instead, I whispered aloud, I don't need to convince her. I just need to convince myself. And for the first time, I let the idea linger. Still, I knew Mom wasn't finished. She'd push harder, dig deeper, maybe even show up at my door. That call wasn't the end. It was the warning shot. The real storm was still on its way. And that's when I realized what happened last night wasn't just a fight between sisters. It was the opening move in a much bigger war. For the next few days, the apartment turned into a battlefield without words. Natalie and I moved around each other like strangers trapped in the same cage, neither willing to speak, but both sending silent shots with every slammed cabinet and every icy glance. Her bedroom door stayed closed most of the time, music thumping through the walls at odd hours, a deliberate attempt to remind me she was still there, still in control of the atmosphere. When she did come out, she made a point of ignoring me walking past without a word, leaving half-eaten food on the counter, kicking off her shoes in the middle of the hallway. It was passive aggression at its finest, and it gnawed at me more than any screaming match could have. At first, I tried to counter it with silence of my own. I picked up her messes, clenched my jaw, told myself it wasn't worth another fight, but every plate left unwashed, every light left on, every cigarette stub flicked carelessly out the window. It all built up inside me like water pressing against a dam. And the worst part, Mom's voice still echoed in my head. If your father were alive, he'd be ashamed of you. Each time Natalie did something inconsiderate, I heard that line. It twisted me in knots, leaving me wondering if maybe Mom was right. Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I was selfish. But late at night, lying in the dark, the truth would creep back, and this wasn't selfishness. This was survival. One evening, I came home from work to find her sprawled on the couch, scrolling her phone with a bowl of popcorn in her lap. The smell of burnt kernels clung to the air. I set my bag down quietly, praying for a night without drama. Then she spoke without looking up. You know, Mom says you've always had a controlling streak. This whole my apartment, my rules thing, classic Claire. You think you're better than everyone else. I froze. Her words weren't random, they were weapons sharpened and thrown with precision. She had Mom feeding her ammunition now. I turned slowly. Natalie, this isn't about control. It's about respect. And you don't get to weaponize Mom's words against me. She smirked, finally glancing up. Funny. Because from where I'm sitting, you look exactly like the tyrant she described. The dam inside me cracked, but I forced myself to stay calm. Yelling would only prove her point. Instead, I said quietly, "You can twist this however you want. But you know the truth, Natalie. You know how much I've covered for you. You know how many times I've picked up after your wreckage. One day you're going to realize who actually kept your world from collapsing." Her smirk faltered for just a second, and I saw it, the flicker of guilt. But then she grabbed the remote and blasted the TV volume, drowning me out. I retreated to my room, shutting the door, my hands trembling. For the first time, though, I didn't cry. Instead, I sat at my desk, pulled out a notebook, and began writing down every boundary I had never been allowed to set. No smoking inside, no uninvited guests, no guilt-tripping calls from Mom deciding my choices for me. The list grew longer than I expected. And as I wrote, I realized something: this silent war with Natalie wasn't just between us. It was the physical manifestation of every unspoken boundary I had let the family bulldoze for years. The tension was unbearable, yes, but maybe it was also necessary. Maybe this suffocating silence was the pressure cooker that would finally force me to stand firm once and for all. Still, I couldn't shake the unease, because battles like this never stayed quiet forever. Somewhere in my gut, I knew it. This wasn't the calm before peace. It was the calm before the next explosion. It happened on a Thursday night, the explosion I'd been dreading. I came home late from work, bone-tired, clutching takeout in one hand and my laptop bag in the other. The moment I opened the door, a wave of noise hit me: laughter, shouting, clinking bottles. My stomach sank. Not again. I stepped into the living room and froze. Natalie had invited at least 10 people over, faces I didn't recognize, sprawled across my furniture like they owned the place. Someone was flicking ashes into one of my potted plants. Another was rummaging through the fridge. The carpet was already spotted with spilled beer. Natalie, perched on the arm of the sofa with a drink in her hand, looked up and smirked. "Hey sis, hope you don't mind, we're celebrating." Celebrating what? My voice came out sharper than I intended. She shrugged. "Life, freedom, you should try it sometime." Her friends laughed and the sound clawed at me. My pulse pounded in my temples. I set the food down on the counter, my hands trembling, and took a breath. "Natalie, we've talked about this. No parties without asking. This is my apartment, my lease, my bills. You don't get to just—" "God, Claire, relax." She cut me off, rolling her eyes dramatically. "You act like you're some saint keeping the world in order. Loosen up for once." The laughter bubbled again, harsher this time. They weren't just guests, they were her audience, and I was the punchline. Something inside me snapped. I walked to the middle of the room, voice steady, but shaking with rage. "Everyone out. Now." The room went quiet. For a moment they looked at me like I was a stranger who'd just wandered in. Then Natalie scoffed. "Don't listen to her. She's just uptight. Stay." That was it, the last straw. I marched to the stereo, yanked the cord from the wall, and turned back, pointing to the door. I said, "Out. This isn't up for debate." The silence that followed was heavier than any noise. Slowly, reluctantly, they started gathering their things. A few muttered curses under their breath, one even shoved past me on the way out. But they left. Natalie, however, didn't move. She stayed on the sofa, glaring at me like I'd just betrayed her in front of the world. When the door shut behind the last guest, she stood, eyes blazing. "You humiliated me," she shouted, slamming her glass down so hard it cracked. "In front of my friends, Claire. Who do you think you are?" I didn't flinch. "I'm the one who works to keep this roof over our heads. I'm the one who pays the rent while you throw parties. I'm the one who cleans up your messes again and again. And I'm done." Her face twisted, fury and disbelief battling for dominance. "Done. You think you can just kick me out like I'm some stranger?" I met her gaze, my voice cold. "If you keep treating me like a stranger in my own home, then yes. You don't get to stay here and destroy everything I've built." She let out a bitter laugh, but her eyes were wet. "You've always hated me. Admit it. You love being the perfect daughter, the martyr, the hero. You need me to be the screw-up so you can feel superior." The words hit like a sucker punch. For a moment I couldn't breathe, but then clarity washed over me. "No, Natalie," I said softly, shaking my head. "I never hated you. I hated how much I let you use me. I hated the version of me this family forced me to become: quiet, accommodating, always sacrificing. I won't do it anymore." The room felt electrified, charged with something final. Natalie opened her mouth like she wanted to scream again, but nothing came out. She turned, stormed into her room, and slammed the door so hard a frame rattled off the wall. I stood in the wreckage of spilled drinks and broken glass, my chest heaving, knowing there was no going back. The line had been drawn. This wasn't just a fight. This was the breaking point. The morning after the blow-up, the apartment looked like a war zone. Sticky floors, overturned cushions, the faint stench of stale beer. I dragged a trash bag through the living room, still replaying every word Natalie had screamed at me. I had barely begun when my phone buzzed. Mom's name lit up the screen. My stomach clenched. I considered letting it ring out, but something in me clicked answer. Her voice came sharp and accusing, no greeting. "What did you do to your sister?" I froze, excuse me. She called me last night, sobbing. Mom continued, her tone thick with rage. "She said you humiliated her in front of her friends, threw them out like she was trash. Claire, how dare you? She's your sister." For a moment I couldn't speak. Natalie had already run to Mom, spinning her version of events. Of course she had. "Mom," I said slowly, "they trashed the place. They were smoking inside, destroying my things. She didn't ask. I had to." "Stop justifying yourself," Mom snapped. "You've always done this. You've always thought you're better than her. Your father would be ashamed if he saw the way you treat family." That line again, the knife she always kept sharpened. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. "You weren't here," I whispered. "You didn't see what happened." "I don't need to," Mom shot back. "I know you. You've always been controlling. You need to apologize to her, today." And then she hung up. I stared at the blank screen, my ears ringing. The weight of her words pressed down heavier than ever. I was shaking, but not with guilt this time, with anger. For years I had swallowed these accusations, bent under them, let them define me. But standing in the middle of my wrecked apartment, surrounded by the mess Natalie left, I realized something: they weren't my failures. They were theirs. Natalie had run to Mom because she knew exactly what card to play. She knew Mom would always choose her. And Mom. She didn't care about the truth. She cared about keeping the family narrative intact. Natalie, the fragile one. Claire, the cold one. The realization left me dizzy. My whole life I had been playing a role in their script. But what if I stopped acting? That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind a storm. Mom's words still echoed, but I replayed my response too, the part where I didn't apologize, the part where I pushed back, even if only slightly. For the first time I wondered what would happen if I broke the script entirely. The next day, Natalie emerged from her room, eyes red and puffy, but chin lifted defiantly. She dropped her empty coffee mug in the sink without washing it and muttered, "Mom says you owe me an apology." I looked at her. Really looked. For once, I didn't see the sister I had been protecting for years. I saw a grown woman perfectly capable of making her own choices and perfectly willing to use me as her scapegoat. I set down my fork, my voice calm but firm. "You're not getting an apology, not this time." Her eyes widened. She hadn't expected that. "You made your choice last night," I continued, "and now I'm making mine. Things are going to change, Natalie, one way or another." She scoffed, but the flicker of fear in her eyes betrayed her. She stomped back into her room, slamming the door. As the walls rattled, I exhaled. My heart was racing, but beneath it was something steadier, something new. Resolve. Because deep down, I knew the next move wasn't hers. It wasn't Mom's. It was mine. And whatever came next, I was finally ready to face it. The days that followed felt like walking through a minefield. Natalie barely spoke to me except for slamming doors and muttering under her breath. Mom called twice more, each time demanding I fix things before the rift became irreversible. But what neither of them knew was that something had shifted in me. I was no longer the quiet, compliant Claire who absorbed blame and apologized just to keep the peace. I had crossed a threshold, and once you cross, you can't go back. The breaking point came when I sat down to do bills. I opened the drawer where I kept important documents, leases, insurance papers, tax returns. But when I reached for the folder marked Dad's estate, it wasn't where I left it. My pulse quickened. I dug through the drawer, tossing aside papers, folders, envelopes. Nothing. I turned to Natalie's room, the door closed, music thudding faintly behind it. My chest tightened. I knocked once hard. She cracked the door open, rolling her eyes. "What now?" "Where are my papers?" I demanded. "What papers?" Her tone was lazy, but her eyes flickered. "The estate documents. From Dad." Her face hardened for a split second before she masked it with a smirk. "Why would I touch your boring paperwork?" I didn't buy it. I pushed past her into the room, drawers half open, clothes piled on the floor, empty soda cans on the dresser. But there on her desk sat the folder, my folder. I picked it up, my hands trembling with fury. This doesn't belong to you. She crossed her arms, feigning innocence. I was just looking. Nothing wrong with that. But I knew. The estate wasn't just numbers on paper. It was leverage. It was the last thing Dad had left us, and if Natalie had her hands on it, who knew what story she'd spin to Mom. That night I sat at the kitchen table, the folder open in front of me, reading every line with a clarity I'd never had before. I wasn't just looking at legal jargon. I was looking at my father's last attempt to set things right, to leave us something solid. And buried in the fine print was a detail Natalie clearly hadn't noticed or hadn't understood. The estate wasn't in Mom's control. It wasn't in Natalie's either. Dad had named me the trustee. I was the one with authority over how it was handled. The realization hit like a thunderclap. For years, I had been treated like the disposable sibling, the one who should sacrifice so Natalie could thrive. But here on paper, in legal black and white, was proof that Dad had trusted me. Not her. Me. It was the first time I felt the ground shift in my favor. I leaned back, the folder clutched to my chest, adrenaline coursing through me. Suddenly, every manipulation, every guilt trip, every time Mom and Natalie had painted me as the villain, it all looked different. Because now I held something they couldn't spin away. A weapon. No, that wasn't right. Not just a weapon, a key. And the question that echoed through my mind was simple but dangerous. What if I finally used it? The thought scared me, but it also thrilled me. For the first time, I wasn't just defending myself. I was holding the possibility of flipping the entire script. Natalie had been reckless enough to expose her hand by taking the folder. Mom had been arrogant enough to assume she still held all the power. But the truth was they'd both overlooked me, and maybe that was their biggest mistake. I closed the folder, my decision not yet formed, but the seed planted. Tomorrow I thought would be different, because now for the first time in my life I had something they wanted, and I wasn't planning on giving it up. The next Sunday, Mom invited us over for dinner. She framed it as a family reconciliation, but I knew better. It was a stage, and I was expected to play my part. Natalie insisted on riding together, sliding into the passenger seat with arms crossed, jaw tight. We didn't speak the whole drive. The silence was thick-charged, broken only by the hum of tires on asphalt. When we arrived, the dining room table was already set. Mom stood at the head, arms folded, her gaze sharp as glass. Good. You're both here, she said, her tone clipped. We sat. The food sat untouched. Mom wasted no time. This nonsense has gone on long enough, she declared. Claire, you will apologize to your sister. Tonight. I almost laughed. The predictability of it. The script once again. But this time I didn't flinch. No, I said calmly. Mom's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? No, I repeated, my voice steady. I'm not apologizing. Not for protecting my home. Not for standing up to being used. Natalie jumped in, her voice dripping with false innocence. See, she doesn't care about family. She only cares about control. I turned to her, finally ready to drop the mask. Funny you should say that, Natalie, because I found the folder you stole from my drawer. Her face paled. I didn't. Don't bother lying, I cut in. You were careless enough to leave it on your desk, and now I know why you wanted it so badly. Mom looked between us, confused. What folder? I slid the papers from my bag and placed them on the table. The estate documents. The truth. Dad left me as trustee, I said. My voice didn't shake. Not you, Natalie. Not even you, Mom. Me. He trusted me to handle everything. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the ticking of the clock. Mom's face went rigid, her knuckles white against the tablecloth. That can't be right, she muttered. It is, I said. It's all here in black and white, and it changes everything. Natalie slammed her fist on the table. You're lying. You must have forged it. Dad would never. I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. Stop. Dad knew who you were, Natalie. He knew how you'd manipulate, how you'd waste, how you'd turn everything into chaos. That's why he chose me. The words hung heavy in the air, sharp as knives. Mom's lips trembled with rage. How dare you speak that way about your sister? How dare I? My voice rose for the first time. How dare you let her walk all over me my whole life? How dare you choose her lies over my truth again and again? Well, not anymore. I'm done being the scapegoat. I'm done playing by your rules. I shoved the folder toward the center of the table. This is my line in the sand. You don't get to erase me. Not anymore. Natalie's eyes glistened with tears. Not the helpless ones she used to manipulate, but the raw, furious kind of someone who finally realizes their grip is slipping. You think this makes you better than me? She hissed. No, I said, my voice quiet, now almost tender. It just makes me free. The silence that followed was deafening. The walls seemed to close in decades of buried truth pressing against us. Mom opened her mouth, then closed it again, her authority crumbling in the face of a reality she couldn't spin away. For the first time in my life, I wasn't begging to be seen. I was standing on ground that was mine, unshakable. When I stood to leave, neither of them stopped me. I walked out into the night air, my chest heaving, but not with fear this time, with liberation. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot, but the balance had shifted. And for once, I wasn't the one cornered. I was the one holding the truth. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every word from that dinner echoing in my mind. The fury in Natalie's voice, the shock in Mom's eyes, and the quiet, immovable truth sitting right there in that folder on my nightstand. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of them. The next morning, my phone buzzed with message after message. Natalie raged in all caps, threatening lawsuits, spreading half-truths to relatives. Mom left voicemails, her voice trembling with a mixture of desperation and anger, begging me to stop dividing the family. But I didn't respond. I sat at my desk, the estate documents open again, and I realized something I hadn't the night before. Being trustee wasn't just a shield, it was a responsibility. Dad hadn't given me this role to score points in some endless sibling war. He'd given it to me because he believed I would do the right thing when the time came. And now the time had come, so I called a lawyer. Not to fight with Natalie, not to punish Mom, but to protect what Dad had entrusted to me. We set up the estate exactly as his wishes stated. Transparent, legal, untouchable. For the first time, the chaos wasn't in control. I was. When Natalie found out, she stormed into my apartment, unannounced, her face blotchy from tears and rage. You think you've won, she spat. You think this makes you better. I looked at her not with anger, but with something closer to sorrow. No, Natalie, this isn't about winning. It's about ending the cycle. She didn't get it. Maybe she never would. But I knew one thing for sure, I was done playing her game. I closed the door on her that day, and though it hurt, though the silence that followed felt strange and heavy, there was a freedom in it too. Because in choosing to walk away, I was choosing myself. Weeks passed. The storm calmed. The phone calls slowed, then stopped. For the first time, my life felt like my own. I went for walks without dread weighing on my chest. I started sketching again, rediscovering pieces of myself I'd buried under years of family drama. One evening, I stood by my window as the sun dipped low, orange light spilling across the skyline. And it struck me, all those years I had begged to belong, to be accepted, to be loved by people who only knew how to take. But freedom wasn't in winning them over. Freedom was in stepping away. And that was the gift Dad had left me, not just the estate, not just the title of trustee, but the courage to finally claim my own life. As I tell you this, I want you to think about your own story. Have you ever felt trapped by people who twist the truth, who make you doubt yourself, who keep you small so they can feel big? If you have hear me when I say this, you are not powerless. Sometimes the greatest act of strength is not to fight harder, but to walk away, to write your own ending. And if you're still here with me, still listening to the end, I want you to know this isn't the end of the journey. It's just the start of something bigger. Because when you step out of one story, you step into another. And the next one, well, you'll want to be there to hear it. So if this story hit home, if you saw a piece of yourself in my fight, don't just sit with it. Join me. Subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and come with me into the next chapter. You never know what twist might be waiting. As for me, I no longer live in the shadow of my family's drama. I carry the lessons, yes. But I live in light now, in truth, in freedom. And maybe that's what Dad wanted for me all along. The days that followed felt quieter than anything I had ever known. Not the tense kind of quiet I grew up with, the silence after slammed doors and muffled arguments, but a gentle, healing quiet. The kind that seeps into your bones and tells you you're safe now. I started noticing small things I had long ignored. The way morning light spilled across my kitchen counter, golden and warm. The laughter of children playing in the park down the street. The simple joy of sipping coffee without a pit in my stomach. For so long I thought freedom would come with some grand gesture, some dramatic finale where I would finally win. But in the end, it was found in these ordinary moments, stitched together into a life that was finally mine. I planted a small garden on my balcony. Just herbs, at first basil, mint, rosemary. Watching them grow became a ritual, a reminder that with care and patience, even fragile things could root deeply and thrive. Maybe I was one of those fragile things too, finally learning to bloom. Sometimes the past still knocks. A stray message from Natalie, a distant relative asking questions. And when it happens, I no longer feel the old panic. I acknowledge it. Then I return to the present, to my peace, to my garden. Because I've learned something invaluable, closure doesn't always mean tying every thread neatly. Sometimes closure is simply choosing not to reopen the wound. So this is where I leave you, not in the chaos of conflict, but in the calm that comes after. A calm I built, piece by piece, by finally choosing myself. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real inheritance my father left me. Not money, not property, but the chance to live free,